In the town of Grand Junction, Colorado, where life is simple and neighbors greet each other with friendly nods, the Cohee family's modest home stood as unremarkable as any other. From the outside, they were like everyone else, parents devoted to their son, working hard, living quietly, keeping to themselves. But inside those four walls, hidden beneath layers of routine and normalcy, lay a secret so dark, so unimaginable, that it would shake this town to its core. On a cold March night, a mother's nightmare came to life in the most disturbing way imaginable. She'd entered her teenage son's room, expecting to find only the typical teenage clutter. But instead, she discovered something chilling, something that no parent could ever be prepared for, a secret that would bring police swarming to their door and would thrust this quiet family into the heart of a horror that defied comprehension. What kind of darkness could lurk behind the familiar face of a child? And what happens to a family when they realize their own son harbors a horrifying truth? Tonight, we delve into the story of Brian Cohee Jr., a young man whose quiet demeanor concealed a mind warped by unspeakable obsessions. As police dig deeper, the terrible truth begins to unravel, and Grand Junction is forced to confront a terror hiding in plain sight. In the small, tight-knit community of Grand Junction, where everyone knows everyone's business, Susan Cohee was a familiar face. People remember her as the friendly woman who waved at her neighbors as she watered her garden or walked her dog down the quiet street. She was the mother of a teenage son, Brian Cohee Jr., a quiet young man with a mind for books and an interest in science. To her neighbors, Susan seemed like any other dedicated parent, doing her best to raise her child in a world that's not always kind. But Susan's life had not been easy. She came from modest beginnings, a family where money was often tight and emotions ran high. Growing up, she learned to keep her head down, to make ends meet quietly, and to avoid drawing attention. Perhaps it was in these early years that she developed a steely resolve, a determination to handle life's challenges on her own terms, no matter the cost. Her friends and family saw her as strong, someone who persevered without complaint, someone who managed her own troubles quietly and gracefully. Yet, beneath that quiet strength, were there signs of a deeper struggle. Susan was a private person, fiercely protective of her son, sometimes to a fault. She was a mother who made sacrifices without question, someone who would go to any length for her family. And perhaps it was this fierce loyalty, this sense of responsibility, that led her to overlook certain things, to ignore the small signals in her own home that something was wrong. Flashbacks emerge as we journey back into Susan's past, a past filled with laughter around the dinner table, soft conversations, the echo of arguments that neighbors might have overheard through open windows on warm summer nights. Sounds that seemed ordinary but were layered with something more. But as Susan's story unfolds, we are left to wonder, did her own struggles, her need for privacy, and her quiet sacrifices blind her to the unsettling reality growing within her home? Did she miss signs she didn't want to see, or perhaps she saw them but chose to turn away? Tonight we go deeper, into the mind of a mother who, in her attempt to shield her son and her family from the harshness of the world, unwittingly protected something she would come to regret. As police uncover more, the community and Susan herself will have to grapple with the reality that sometimes the greatest horrors lie within the people we trust most. It was an unremarkable March evening, or so it seemed, but what began as a routine night would soon unravel into something beyond comprehension. In the quiet of her home, Susan Cohee moved through the familiar routines of motherhood, unaware that the next moments would alter her life forever. Then, a sharp intake of breath, Susan's voice on the 911 call, trembling, barely holding steady, as she tells the dispatcher that she's discovered something unthinkable. When the police arrived at the Cohee residence, they were expecting perhaps a domestic dispute, maybe a burglary. But as soon as they stepped inside, the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. Officers noticed Susan standing stiffly in the hallway, her face ashen, her hands trembling. She pointed them toward her son's bedroom, her words halting and laced with an undercurrent of dread. They moved slowly, cautiously, unsure of what lay ahead. And as one officer opened the closet door, the horrifying sight waiting for them changed everything. Inside, carefully hidden among crumpled clothes and towels, was the unmistakable sight of human remains. A head, swathed in cloth. In that instant, the quiet house transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. The officers, stunned and shaken, took a step back, struggling to process the reality before them. They looked at Susan, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of shock and guilt. What had seemed like the home of an ordinary family was now something far darker, something that would haunt their memories long after they left. As word of the discovery reached the station, a full-scale investigation was set into motion. More officers arrived, carefully combing through the house for any other traces of the horrific truth hidden within. And with each room they searched, with each new piece of evidence unearthed, the story of what really lay behind the Cohey family's closed doors began to take shape. One question lingered in the minds of every officer present: how could something so terrible, so grotesque, be hidden in plain sight? And if this was only the beginning of their findings, what more would they discover as they peeled back the layers of this deeply unsettling family secret? The stakes were raised as investigators followed the trail of clues, a trail that would lead them down a path none of them had anticipated. As the police dug deeper, they came to realize that the darkness within this home was far more twisted, far more consuming than they had ever imagined. What followed would test the limits of justice, compassion, and the very nature of humanity itself. The investigation into the Cohey household was only beginning, but from the start, officers sensed this case was unlike any they'd encountered. Each step deeper into the home revealed details that defied belief, pieces that hinted at a mind disturbed, at an obsession that had silently grown to consume everything in its path. As they meticulously examined the rooms, investigators began gathering clues, each one stranger and more chilling than the last. On the nightstand in Brian's room, they found notebooks filled with disturbing sketches, fragmented thoughts scrawled across the pages, drawings of body parts, anatomy diagrams, meticulous notes on dissection. It was as though they had stumbled upon the private world of a mind fascinated, even fixated with the macabre. To understand the young man behind these images, police turned to the neighbors, hoping to learn more about the quiet teenager who'd grown up in their midst. Most described him as reserved, intelligent, though somewhat reclusive. Some recalled seeing him walk alone through the neighborhood at odd hours, eyes cast downward, headphones on, as though he were wrapped up in a world of his own. A few admitted, reluctantly, that they'd found him strange, but none could have imagined the horrors lying within the walls of his home. As the days stretched on, police dug deeper into the family's past. They questioned Susan, attempting to piece together her perspective. But the more they probed, the more Susan's responses left them uneasy. Her voice, calm and measured, seemed at odds with the horror they had uncovered. She insisted she knew nothing of her son's obsessions, nothing of the darkness that had crept into her own home. But there was something in her eyes, a guardedness, an unwillingness to look too deeply, perhaps an attempt to shield herself from the unimaginable truth. Then came a startling discovery hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Brian's closet. They found a set of carefully wrapped items, small bones, meticulously labeled and cataloged. This wasn't an impulse or a crime of passion. No, it was something far more methodical, something that had been planned, studied, and hidden away in the secrecy of his room. The evidence left officers questioning everything. What was the source of this obsession? How long had this fixation on death and dissection festered? And did anyone else in the family suspect what lay hidden? At this point, the investigators found themselves drawn into a haunting question. If Brian's fixation had gone unnoticed for so long, were there others who had seen signs but chose to ignore them? They turned to family members who had drifted away over the years, looking for any trace of insight, any hint that might shed light on this twisted obsession. A distant aunt recalled seeing strange art projects as a child, sketches that seemed too realistic for someone so young, but she'd brushed it off as a phase. Another relative remembered a young Brian dissecting insects in the backyard, studying them with an intensity that, in hindsight, seemed far from innocent. Piece by piece, the investigators assembled the puzzle, each revelation casting a darker shadow over the family. By now, they realized they were dealing with something far more than a single crime. It was the manifestation of a hidden life, a world concealed from everyone but those willing to look closely. But just as the investigators thought they understood the full extent of Brian's hidden world, a new piece of evidence emerged, one that would shake them to the core and reveal an even deeper layer of horror. And with that discovery, the Cohey home, once ordinary and quiet, would be forever marked as the scene of an unspeakable darkness. The case that had started with a mother's horrific discovery was spiraling into something far deeper, a tragedy that would haunt Grand Junction for years to come. As investigators returned to the Cohey home one last time, they thought they had unearthed everything there was to find, every dark clue, every twisted piece of Brian's macabre obsession. But something continued to gnaw at them, an unsettled feeling that perhaps there was one final truth waiting to be uncovered. With cautious glances exchanged between them, the officers forced the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit with an odd, stale air that seemed to cling to their skin. And there, arranged on a makeshift table, was what they had feared all along: a collection of preserved specimens, remnants of Brian's victims, laid out with disturbing precision. Glass jars held fragments of bone, organs suspended in murky liquid, each item meticulously labeled, each one telling a story of unimaginable horror. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Tucked behind the table, covered by a thick cloth, lay an object that sent chills down the spines of even the most seasoned detectives. As they lifted the cloth, their worst suspicions were confirmed. Before them lay the carefully preserved body of his latest victim, Warren Barnes, a local man who had gone missing weeks prior. His body bore evidence of systematic dissection, a grotesque work that showcased the depths of Brian's obsession. This was not merely a crime. It was the work of someone who had crossed every boundary, someone who had not only taken a life but had treated it as an object of study, a twisted project hidden in the shadows of his own home. The truth was now clear. Brian Cohey Jr. had transformed his curiosity into an all-consuming nightmare, a nightmare he had been carefully crafting, undetected, for months, perhaps even years. As the final pieces of evidence were cataloged and removed, silence fell over the room, a silence heavy with the weight of what they had found. The officers stood motionless, haunted by the realization that the very walls around them had witnessed horrors beyond comprehension. In that moment, the full horror of what had been hidden within the Cohey home was revealed, a chilling end to a case that would forever scar those who dared to uncover it. And as they closed the door behind them, they knew that Grand Junction would never forget the haunting legacy left by the Cohey family's darkest secret. As the investigation concluded and the horrifying truth of Brian Cohey Jr.'s actions came to light, the life Susan Cohey had known was shattered. In the days following the discovery, Susan found herself engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions: shock, grief, disbelief, and perhaps the heaviest weight of all, guilt. She was questioned repeatedly by the authorities, who probed into every corner of her relationship with her son, looking for any sign, any hint that she might have known, that she might have been complicit in the horrors that unfolded within her home. But as investigators reviewed her life, they found no evidence linking Susan directly to her son's crimes. She had, in her own way, been just as much a victim, drawn into a tragedy she could never have foreseen, forced to confront the unimaginable actions of someone she loved. Despite being cleared of wrongdoing, the community could not help but look at her differently, their glances now laced with suspicion and unease. How could a mother not know, they wondered? How could such darkness remain hidden under her roof? As news of the case spread beyond Grand Junction, people across the country grappled with a troubling reality. How well do we truly know those closest to us? Could the friendly faces we see each day be hiding secrets far darker than we dare imagine? The Cohey family story became a chilling reminder of how easily appearances can deceive, of how even the most ordinary homes might harbor unimaginable secrets. And for the residents of Grand Junction, life was never quite the same. Neighbors who once shared friendly waves and idle chatter now spoke in hushed tones, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Parents questioned their children, looking for anything they might have overlooked. Trust, once taken for granted, had been deeply shaken. In the end, the story of Susan and Brian Cohey stood as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest horrors lie just beyond our view, masked by familiarity and routine. It was a story that highlighted the silent struggles people carry, the unspoken battles that shape them, and the danger of turning a blind eye to those we think we know. And as the community moved on, one haunting question remained, echoing through the quiet Colorado streets. Could it happen again? Could someone else be hiding a secret just as dark, just as unimaginable, within the walls of another ordinary home? Today, Susan Cohey lives a life marked by shadows. In the aftermath of her son's crimes, she withdrew from the community she once called home, seeking refuge in the anonymity of a distant town. Brian Cohey Jr. now serves a life sentence, his actions forever etched into the history of Grand Junction, a place still haunted by the memory of what lay hidden within an ordinary home. For the residents, moving forward hasn't been easy. They've been left with a lingering unease, a reminder that the familiar faces they pass each day may hold secrets beyond comprehension. In the end, the Cohee case stands as a chilling testament to the mysteries that can exist right next door. And as we close this chapter, one question remains: how well do we truly know the people we call neighbors? If this story left you questioning what lies behind closed doors, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the hidden truths around us. Like, share, and join us as we explore more real-life mysteries that challenge what we think we know. Stay tuned for our next story. Sometimes the darkest secrets are closer than we realize.